On this episode of Frogs Insider, Melissa sits down with Brian Howell of BuffZone.com to get the latest intel on TCU's Week 1 opponent, Colorado. Plus, realignment news, who survived NFL Cut Day, dumb article feedback, and I answer all of your questions. Let's go! Welcome into Frogs Insider. I am Jamie Plunkett, one of your hosts for this show. You'll notice that Melissa Triebwasser is not with me currently. She will be along shortly. Talk to Brian Howell of BuffZone.com to buckle down and preview Colorado for us this week. We are a part, though, before we get into all of that, of the Dave Campbell's Texas Football Republic of Football Network. You can find our podcast on any of those Republic of Football Network streams, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get this show at the Frogs Insider exclusive streams on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as other places. And if you're watching this right now on the YouTube channel, thank you for doing that as well. A little bit of housekeeping about all of that stuff. Please hit that subscribe button. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. It's completely free. You can get a notification every time we send some new content that direction. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think about the shows, what you think about the content we're producing, all of that kind of stuff. That really helps us out. And if you're listening wherever you get your podcasts, go ahead and hit that review button. Leave us a rating. Make sure you're following the channel. That stuff really, really helps us out. We've seen some awesome growth over the last couple of months since we switched over to Dave Campbell's Texas Football. Very excited about the growth we're seeing. Very thankful for each and every one of you that listens on a weekly basis, that interacts with the content on YouTube and on Instagram and on TikTok, wherever you might catch it. Very, very thankful for all of you. The more you interact with that stuff, the more there's an opportunity for that stuff to get in front of other TCU fans. And we want every TCU fan to know that they have a space at Frogs Insider to talk about the Horned Frogs, talk about the teams and players that they love so much. So thank you in advance for liking the show, for sharing the show with a friend, for hitting that subscribe button and doing all of the stuff that helps us get in more Horned Frog ears. We really, really do appreciate you doing that. A big shout out as well to our show sponsors, Hell's Half Acre and Home Field Apparel. You'll hear more about them later on in the episode, but I just wanted to name them both at the top as well. And last little thing here right off the top, we're trying a little bit of a different format for these midweek previews. Melissa is going to sit down with people who cover TCU opponents to find out more about those teams every week. And I'm going to do more of the midweek news, notes stuff, answer your questions, mailbag kind of stuff. Maybe get into some picks and some betting stuff as well. This part is just because, for us from a scheduling standpoint, makes life a little bit easier because she's a teacher. She's a flag football coach, as you well know now. That season's ramping up. I got a full-time job. I'm a dad, right? We've got all this other stuff going on. And so in the midweek, sometimes scheduling the two of us could be a little bit challenging. This allows us to make sure that we're getting you this midweek preview every single week. I think it's a cool format. It's a little bit different from our Monday show, so there's some variety from week to week. And plus, like I said, the scheduling standpoint, it's pretty helpful from that standpoint as well. But that's enough of that. That's enough of the off-the-top stuff. Let's jump in, because there was some realignment news this week. You might have missed it. If you're not on HornedFrogBlitz.com, you definitely missed it. So make sure that you're subscribed over there for football season, because you're going to get more TCU football insider information from Jeremy Clark and myself than you're going to get anywhere else. We'll bring a lot of it to this podcast, but there's some stuff that we just don't always cover on the week-to-week here on the show that you're going to want access to. You're going to have access to the biggest TCU Horned Frog community over there as well at Horned Frog Blitz, and right now it's 50% off. So make sure you sign up for that. Don't miss out on anything for this TCU football season. But one of the things that we were talking about over there on the site this week and last week was conference realignment. It's been a topic of conversation for all summer. It seems like this time of year, it's been normalized that we're just going to talk about realignment every single summer with teams moving to different conferences, and we've obviously seen a lot of that this year with the Big 12 adding 4 new members and then inviting 4 new members on top of that, with the Big 10 getting bigger, with the Pac 12 essentially dissolving. And lately there's been conversation around Stanford and Cal joining the ACC along with SMU. The details of that have started to leak out, where Stanford and Cal would take lower rates per year. SMU is reportedly foregoing 7 years of conference revenue to TV dollars revenue to help sweeten the deal for other schools like Clemson and Florida State, to give them a little bit larger cut of the pie. All of that has been leaking out into the media, and that stuff's obviously ongoing with the ACC, but there were some interesting tweets from some national writers. Brett McMurphy was one, Nicole Auerbach was another, two folks who have been really on top of realignment news this cycle, saying that the Big 12 is not has no plans to expand it. The Big 12 is not interested in Stanford and Cal. They have had no conversations with Stanford and Cal, and it seemed like an odd little news break in the midst of all of these Stanford and Cal to the ACC news that's been ongoing for the last couple of weeks. And here's why those tweets happened. It's because late last week, the Big 12 and Stanford did start some conversations again. They've had a couple rounds of these conversations now, where there was an opportunity maybe for Stanford and Cal to come to the Big 12 instead of going to the ACC. Those conversations were relatively short-lived this time around, but the idea that started these conversations up this time around was that ESPN would potentially rather pay Cal and Stanford their Big 12 share of the TV revenue, which is roughly $20 million a year annually, than pay what they would have to pay to add Cal and Stanford and SMU to the ACC, which is reportedly as much as $75 million annually. So 40 versus 75 is a pretty big gap between those two numbers. And it seemed like ESPN would prefer to pay the lower of those two, especially, we know this isn't the last round of realignment. We don't know what ESPN has on the books or has planned for future media deals with other leagues and everything like that. They got to keep some powder dry. But at the end of the day, I think those conversations fell apart pretty quickly because Stanford has had a consistent hang-up with BYU being in the Big 12. Baylor is a little bit of a hindrance to those conversations as well, but BYU is the big sticking point. And I think Melissa and I have talked about this on the show before, where Stanford was a big reason why BYU never got a Pac-12 invite. And so there's still some tension there. There's still just two very dramatically different universities and institutions with two different goals, two different outlooks on the world, that Stanford kind of has an issue with some of that. And you combine that with some of the profiles of some ACC schools like Notre Dame and North Carolina, and I think that makes a little bit more sense from a Stanford standpoint, even though they would be getting probably about $5 million less annually from that TV media deal going to the ACC versus the Big 12. Of course, that ACC stuff isn't a lock yet by any stretch of the imagination. They had scheduled a meeting to vote on adding Stanford, Cal, and SMU earlier this week, but that meeting was postponed due to the campus shooting at North Carolina on Monday. And I want to take a moment here and pause and just say that my heart goes out to the North Carolina community, the faculty, the staff, the students, the family members of anybody that was on campus that day or in the days following that shooting. That's all too common these days in our country on our school campuses, all the way from college down to elementary school. And as someone who has kids in school and who's married to a teacher, it's always kind of a daily worry, a daily fear of mine that the news is going to break and it's going to be their school the next time around. So my heart goes out to the North Carolina family and community. That I hope that the trauma of this event doesn't impact you for the rest of your life, as it has done for other people in the past. But that was also why the ACC, like I said, postponed their vote. About 24 hours after the vote was postponed, news started to leak out that the ACC still didn't have the votes to even invite Stanford, Cal, and SMU. The bylaws for the conference say they need 12 of the 15 members to vote yes. Right now, they don't have 12. There are 4 dissenting votes. Those are commonly thought to be Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, and NC State. I don't see any reason why those 4 schools would switch and start voting yes. So the 2 questions that kind of need answering right now in this regard are, why would the ACC schedule a vote if they know they don't have the votes, unless they just want to get it over with and say, hey, we're going to stop these conversations for now. We don't have the votes. We don't see that changing anytime soon. That might be one reason why they would schedule a vote, even if they didn't think they had the votes needed to invite new members. And then the next question now is, when will they reschedule that vote? The further we get into this football season, the more chaotic any realignment news will be. The shorter amount of time any other conferences, like say the AAC, if SMU were to leave, would have to make an alternative plan. Now, Mike Oresco said earlier this week as well that the AAC does have backup plans in case SMU decides to go to the ACC. But all of that just becomes even more of a burden once you actually get into football season, which we are now in. So I think it would be in the best interest of the ACC to figure it out. Just thinking of the Big Cat, Barstool Big Cat gif, figure it out, screaming. Just figure it out and get there. Make a vote one way or another. Make a decision. Let Stanford and Cal figure out alternatives. Let SMU stay in the AAC if that's what they end up doing, and just figure it out. From a Big 12 perspective, though, I think this is the last time that the Big 12 flirts with any kind of westward expansion. From what I've been told, this was really kind of the last opportunity that they were going to give to Stanford to explore membership in the league. But now that they've gone through these conversations a couple of different times, they've presented their best effort and their best offer to Stanford to take that $20 million a year from ESPN. Fox, there was not going to be any kind of pro rata from Fox on this, so they were not going to be full members. They weren't going to get that full cut, but they would get the ESPN cut, which is where that $20 million comes from. So now I think the Big 12's gaze is going to start to swing fully east and just kind of see what happens next with the ACC, right? Like there's still opportunity for expansion if the ACC breaks up, which at this point I'd say is more likely than not, probably 70-30, 75-25 in favor of the conference not making it to its next media deal in 2036. And I've seen some folks talking about SMU and the benefit of going to the ACC, even if they're not taking revenue in the next 7 years, and how things would be different after that 7 years. I think that any school in that situation, if they had the financial ability to do so, I think it would be wise to do it. But I don't think that they would ever see a dollar from the ACC as it currently stands, because there's no way this thing's lasting 7 more years. Absolutely no way. But again, I think if you're SMU, you've got to do it, right? Like, you've got the money to go and do it, so go and do it. You've got the boosters that said they'll fork up the dollars. I on paper, I can see how they'd make it work. I think that they're not factoring in donor exhaustion into that at all, considering you're funding the entire athletics department at that point. You're trying to make an NIL budget that's competitive with ACC schools, not AAC schools. You're also trying to pay coaches, right? You're trying to pay for travel for all of these teams. You're trying to pay for stadium renovations and for other amenities on campus for student athletes. And the burden there is pretty significant, even if you think about it from the standpoint of, they just wouldn't be getting AAC dollars anymore. Well, you're still trying to compete with a Power 4 program, a Power 4 conference, and those dollars are much more significant in a lot of different ways. Still think SMU should do it if they get the chance, though. All right, that's enough about expansion. That's enough about conference realignment, because it's football season, and I'm tired of talking about realignment. I'm over it. I'll keep talking about it, though, whenever the ACC figures out what the heck they're doing next, because there will be some implications for the Big 12 and for TCU whenever those decisions get made. But for now, let's move on. Before we get into this week in TCU's game, there are some TCU players at the next level who experienced cut day, and I just want to kind of run through this stuff really quickly to make sure that everyone has an understanding of where TCU Pro Frogs are. in the NFL right now. So Max Duggan was cut by the Chargers earlier this week. He was released, but he made it through waivers, and he has been re-signed to the LA Chargers practice squad. So he's going to be an LA Charger on the practice squad. I think that's a perfect spot for him right now. An opportunity to continue learning under that system. If anything happens to Justin Herbert or Easton Stick, he's right there for them to scoop up and bring onto the 53-man roster. I think that's a really good situation for Max Duggan to be in right now. A guy that wasn't drafted, though, that did make his 53-man roster is Amari DiMercato. Corey Clement was the running back casualty for Arizona, and that let DiMercato make the 53-man roster. He had a really good preseason, scored a couple touchdowns, made some really good runs. And, you never want to say, that an injury was a good thing, but Kendre Miller going down early in that Michigan game allowed Amari DiMercato the opportunity to show what he could do on a legitimate national stage. And he made the most of that Michigan game. There's no doubt about it. And now he's had the opportunity to make the 53-man roster with the Cardinals. That's pretty cool. Another Frogs also on that roster, LJ Collier, also made that roster out in Arizona, so that's pretty neat as well. D. Winters made the 53-man roster with the 49ers. He and Matt Pryor are the two Horned Frogs out there on that roster. Kevontae Turpin made the roster for the Dallas Cowboys, so the electric punt returner and kick returner is going to be wearing the star on the side of his helmet once again. Alana Lee was waived by the Vikings and signed to their practice squad. That happened in just really before I started hitting record. I'm glad I checked Twitter one more time so that I could drop that note in there that he did get re-signed to the Vikings practice squad. Aviante Collins was waived and signed to the Bears practice squad. Let's see here. Jalen Reagor, Ty Summers, Ben Banigou, Garrett Wallow, Ross Blacklock, Ennis Gaines, and Travin Howard were all waived by their respective teams at the time of this recording, which is Wednesday early evening. They have not landed on practice squads, but it'll be interesting to see how many of them do or if they're signed elsewhere and how that goes for them. Best of luck to all of them. And meanwhile, Quentin Johnston, Darius Davis, Steve Avila, Kendre Miller, THT, Dylan Horton, all rookies from TCU that made their rosters. None of those were terribly surprising, but it's always good to see. And there's still a good number of Horned Frogs around the league that are on their rosters heading into the season now. Andy Dalton out in Carolina. Joe Noteboom with the Rams. He and Steve Avila are both projected to be the starting offensive linemen on the left side of that line for the Rams. So that's pretty cool. Two Horned Frogs starting on the O-line in Los Angeles. Ardarius Washington made the roster with the Ravens. Jerry Hughes is with the Texans. Halapulavati Vaitai is in Detroit with the Lions. Lucas Niang with the Chiefs. Trey Merrick is primed to have a really, really big season for the Raiders. And then Austin Schlottman made the 53-man roster as a backup offensive lineman with the Vikings. So that's kind of a quick rundown. A lot of Horned Frogs survived NFL Cut Day. A lot are still looking for NFL homes. But any way you cut it, it's pretty cool to see this many Horned Frogs playing pro football. Always having been kind of the afterthought school, the school that was left out, the school that's had to battle so hard for everything that it has. You see that come out in the players that it produces, and it's pretty cool to see this many Horned Frogs wearing various NFL helmets these days. It'll be fun to track them again this season. We'll have all of that again over on Horned Frog Blitz, and Melissa will do all of that for her Patreon over at patreon.com/frogsinsider as well. So you're going to be well covered when it comes to Pro Frogs this fall. One last little thing before we get into Melissa's preview. Sonny Dykes had his first game week press conference this week. It was always good to talk to the head man for Horned Frog football. It was about a 20-minute press conference. You can watch that whole video right here on this YouTube channel. This is where you're watching this show. If you're listening on a podcast, again, go to the Frogs Insider YouTube channel. It's right there. You can watch the whole thing. You can also see the videos from Chandler Morris, Jared Wiley, and Jamoy Hodge, their media day availability as well for game week. They all met with the media on Tuesday afternoon as well, and we've got all of that content up there on the Frogs Insider YouTube channel. Couple of notable things about Sonny's press conference. He didn't say anything otherworldly or groundbreaking or anything like that, but he did say that he felt the team has more depth this year than they did last year. I think the number that he gave was Last year, he felt like they had about a 1.5 players of depth at every position. This year, that feels more like 2.5 players of depth at every position. And that seems to have borne out in fall camp with how they rotated guys, especially in the secondary, at wide receiver, along the offensive line, defensive line as well. You just saw a lot of guys rotating in and out, first-team reps, second-team reps, some third-team reps as well. Seems like a much deeper team this year than it was a season ago, as Sonny and his staff were still getting their feet under them and still managed to make the college football playoff, which is so impressive. From a player perspective, Dalen Wright is progressing pretty well. You'll remember that he got here a little bit late into fall camp, had some qualification issues, finishing up some classes at Minnesota, finally got all of his stuff signed off on and approved, and he began practicing about 2.5 weeks ago now at this point. I've been out there a couple times. Media hasn't been out there in about a week to watch practice, but when we did see Dalen Wright practicing, he looked good. He looked athletic. Obviously still trying to pick up this offense and figure out what his role is and where he can fit into things. And for that reason, I'm not sure exactly how much of him we'll see this Saturday. He'll be on the field at times for sure, but I just don't know how big of a role he's going to have week one. I think when we get into the week 2 against Nichols or against SMU, maybe even at Houston, we'll start to see his role expand depending on what other receivers step up as well. But this is an opportunity for TCU to get another super athletic, big line wide receiver out there who can do some really impressive things when he gets the ball in his hands. And the last kind of thing that stood out from Sonny's press conference, he thinks the heat will be an advantage for TCU. And you know, I don't know that the heat's necessarily a good thing any way you cut it, especially when Sonny mentioned during the presser that Jared Wiley lost 17 pounds in a single practice earlier this week. Because of the heat. And Wiley was quick to remind everyone that he gained all of that weight back in the same day. It was an opportunity to talk about the preparation that the strength and conditioning staff has done, the medical staff has done to keep TCU players healthy during these extreme heat days. But I think TCU's practice in these heats will give them at least a mental edge in this game on Saturday when the high is supposed to hit 105, 106, and the heat index on that field at Amon G. Carter Stadium is going to be even well above that, probably in the low 110s, somewhere around there. Just from a mental aspect, not even a physical aspect, the way that you push through some of that heat, TCU will certainly have the advantage there, and their medical staff is well prepared for treating players in the game. We've talked a lot about nutrition since Sonny Dykes and Kaz Kazadi got here on staff, about the revolutionary things that they are doing from a nutrition and wellness standpoint and a recovery standpoint. I have no doubt that they're going to do everything that they can to keep these kids safe in the extreme heat that they're going to be experiencing on Saturday. So let's dive in now, though, to Melissa's interview. Again, she sat down with Brian Howell of BuffZone.com to preview TCU Colorado in week 1. Let's go ahead and jump into that conversation and see what they've got to say.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the midweek edition of the Frogs Insider podcast. I am Melissa Triebwasser, and I have the pleasure of welcoming Brian Howell to this Colorado TCU preview. Brian is the beat writer for Buff Zone. He also covers multiple sports for the Boulder Daily Camera. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Excited to have you on tonight.
Yeah, first of many, I guess, since we'll be Big 12 rivals.
Yeah, this is a ton of fun. You came down for Big 12 Media Days. You booked that trip before, I think we knew officially that Colorado was going to be a part of the conference. And it's a good thing you were there because this is your new home now for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I went down there knowing that it was a possibility. And then it was about 2 weeks later that it became a reality. And I was like, well, I'm glad I went down there. So
yeah, and in the meantime,
it's interesting.
Yeah, you learned some good barbecue spots too. So,
yes,
this is the important thing for joining the Big 12 is knowing where to get the good barbecue.
That's right.
But before this game becomes a in-conference rivalry game, we get to finish the second half of a home and home. Last year, TCU went up to Colorado, an ugly first half, but a game that ultimately kind of led to Max Duggan becoming the starter quarterback for TCU, starting a magical run for the Horned Frogs as they went 12-0 in the regular season, lost a heartbreaker Big 12 championship, made the college football playoffs, and advanced to the national championship game. We don't talk about what happened there. But it's kind of crazy to think of how many dominoes had to fall correctly for that season and how they all started out in Boulder a season ago. Now Colorado comes down to Fort Worth, and they're kind of in position to be kind of this darling team. Maybe not go 12-0 in the regular season, but obviously have all of the hype, all of the energy around the program with the insertion of Deion Sanders, Coach Prime at the helm. We've seen the impact that Deion has had in the off the field, the merchandising, the donors, the move to the Big 12. You could credit him with that. But there are so many questions as to what his team is going to look like on the field. Part of that might be a new offensive coordinator. Part of that might be a new defensive coordinator. And part of that might be nearly 90 new players on this roster from a season ago. Brian, what can you tell us about what the expectations around Colorado are this fall?
Well, first of all, I'll say one thing that these two programs have in common is they both gave up more than 60 points in their most recent game.
You're going to go right there. Brian was talking before this. He's ready to make this a rivalry.
I'm just saying, hey, in that last game, TCU knows how Colorado felt about it 11 times last year. So, they gave up like 60, I think it was 63-21 the last game against Utah. But when you ask what to expect, I do not expect that to happen to Colorado. And if it does, it won't be very often. So they're going to be a lot more competitive than they were last year, in my opinion. I mean, I don't expect them to be a great team. I think they could be a bowl team, but this is a team that's going to be competitive. And, they've got a quarterback for the first time in a while, and they've got Travis Hunter, who might be one of the most exciting players in the entire country. They have Dylan Edwards as a running back that not a lot of people know. He's a true freshman, 4-star that actually grew up in Dallas, played for Prime as a youth, and then moved to Kansas and was going to go to Notre Dame and then flipped to Colorado. And he's been an electric player in fall camp. And so they've got a lot of weapons and exciting guys that are going to make this a much more enjoyable season, I think, for Colorado fans.
You brought up Shedeur Sanders, and I think that's kind of the key point to start. We saw the difference a quarterback can make. We've seen that all across college football. We saw that with TCU a season ago. How much of an adjustment is it going to be for him going from Jacksonville State to a Power 5 conference in Colorado? And, he obviously has the skill players. You mentioned running back, wide receiver. Does he have the offensive line to be able to be an effective quarterback this fall?
Yeah, well, first off, I don't think the adjustment's going to be a big deal for him. This is a guy that, he wasn't the traditional FCS quarterback, and we have not seen a lot of FCS quarterbacks. I actually went back and looked in the last 5 years. The only FCS quarterback I could find that went from FCS to a Power 5 starter was Cam Ward at Washington State last year. Shedeur will be the second one, and there's somebody else, Illinois or Purdue or something like that is going to do that move. But unlike those others, Shedeur had big time offers coming out of high school. I mean, he had Power 5 offers coming out of high school, chose to go to Jackson State to play for his dad. So he's a little bit different than that. So he's grown up around big time football. He trains and learns a lot from Tom Brady. The adjustment's not going to be a big deal for him. Does he have the people to block for him? We're going to find out. I mean, that's one of the biggest question marks about this team is how good is this offensive line? And I don't know. I mean, they've got 5 guys that were starters at their colleges last year, but the only 2 that were at the Power 5 level were at Colorado, which was not maybe. I mean, they were really one of the worst offenses in the country. I mean, they were probably bottom 5 offense in the entire country. So you have 2 offensive line starters in the Power 5, and they were both from this offense. Now you have a couple guys from Kent State that, that's a jump up from the MAC to, Power 5. And then they have some guys that were FCS or junior college, All-American or all-conference players. So accomplished, but at a lower level. That doesn't mean these guys can't play, but we just haven't seen it. And so I don't know how good this group is. So to answer your question, I don't know. They think so, but they've been going against themselves all practice or all off season. So how are they going to do against TCU, against Nebraska, against, USC? I don't know, but I think that they're confident in that group, but we got to see it.
Well, you talk about confidence in a group. When you turn over your roster like that, how much of an impact does that have on just the feeling around a program, the leadership in the locker room. You have all of these guys coming from different places trying to come together and do so. I mean, really, it's been kind of like, what do they say? Building the plane while it's in flight, right? That's what it's feel like, because it feels like the roster is changing almost every single day up until a couple weeks ago. Do you think that this team can come together enough to, like you said, potentially be in contention for a bowl game, or is that going to be a learning curve as well?
Yeah, and I'll even say it's been even sooner than that. I mean, on Friday, all of a sudden, a new linebacker showed up that was at Arizona State, got kicked off the team 2 weeks ago. All of a sudden, he showed up at practice at Colorado. So they're adding guys even now. They keep telling me that and Prime will tell you that chemistry. He's not worried about that. He just wants to win. And frankly, from what I've seen, being around these players, and I got to go kind of be around them one day when they were working out in the summer. Chemistry is not an issue. These guys have come together, and I think they're all bonding over the fact that they're coming from all these different places and going for the same goal. And as far as leadership, I think that this coaching staff has done a good job of, they've really brought in leaders that and sort of handpicked them. I mean, Shedeur Sanders is a leader, and that's his son, so he's going to be a leader right off the bat. Travis Hunter, just because of who he is a leader and a guy that people are going to listen to. And if anybody watched the documentary on Prime about his time at Jackson State, he had kind of the chosen group that he had, that he handpicked him and said that you guys are the leaders of this team. He kind of does that, and so it's clear when you watch all their videos and everything. There are guys that are prime guys that are like, Dylan Edwards, just even though he's a true freshman, he's a leader. Cam and Summa Craig, Shiloh Sanders on the other side of the field on defense is a leader. So I think these guys are leading this team, and they're really truly bonding over the fact that, they have this mentality that everybody thinks we're going to stink. So, they're bonding over that they think they're a lot better than people say.
You brought up the defense earlier and how bad of a unit that was a season ago, and said that you expect it to be better. I think defense is often the biggest adjustment when you turn things over. I mean, skill players at the end of the day, you're doing the same things. You're just kind of maybe doing them in a different order, but rehashing a defensive system, especially with a bunch of strangers, can be a real difficulty. Do you expect this defense to be competitive? What does competitive look like? What do they have to do to let this offense cook?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the hardest side of the ball to really see that gel, and I think you're right in that regard. That's the side I worry about the most, and they're going to be more competitive than last year. I think. I mean, last year they were horrible. I mean, as bad as the offense was, the defense was worse. And the first half that we've talked about it, you and I have, but like the first half of that game last year in Boulder, I think all of us covering Colorado were like, "Whoa, this defense is actually pretty good," because TCU couldn't do anything. Then all of a sudden, the second half, TCU just kept handing the ball off, and it was like, "Oh, that's easy," And then that's what teams did the rest of the year. And so, TCU discovered something in Colorado and had a whole lot of fun that second half of that game. But this defense will be better because they have better players, and there's only one starter back from the TCU saw last year, Trevor Woods, and he was their best player. He's pretty good, but I do worry about depth. They have a lot of guys that are coming from schools where big time schools, but they didn't play a lot. Bishop Thomas was the scout team player of the year at Florida State last year on the defensive line. Amari McNeil has really looked good in camp. He was a backup at Tennessee last year. Demoy Kennedy, Jaquez Robinson are from Alabama. Good players, but didn't play a whole lot at Alabama. So are these guys going to come together and make a really good defense? I don't think it's going to be a really good defense, but it's not going to give up 45, 46 points a game like they gave up last year. I think if they can keep offenses to around 28 to 30 points a game, then this offense could be good enough to get CU to a bowl game.
Everybody, you can't talk about Colorado without talking about, the kind of the Coach Prime effect. And you talked about how he picks his guys, how, he kind of welcomes the extra attention. He likes to put the pressure on guys. That is all well and good in fall camp. It's all well and good at the podium. But when games start, if things don't go well, if this team isn't competitive, is this the type of team that's going to stay kind of rallied around? Is he the type of person that can keep them rallied around? Or I hate to call it a shtick, but it's a coach thing, right? It's kind of a shtick. Is that shtick going to work if this team starts 0-6 or 0-7?
Well, we'll find out. Well, I don't know if we'll find out or not.
Yeah.
We could find
Yeah.
out. I think that's one of the biggest question marks is how he's going to handle it. And, I have watched, throughout this offseason, I've gone back and watched some of his press conferences after losses. Actually, somebody told me he doesn't talk after losses, and I went back and found he actually does. And he actually did good after losses. I was there for one of them after the Celebration Bowl. The difference is he was losing 2 games a year.
Yeah.
And so that's a little bit different. If they start, if they get blown out in Fort Worth, and if they lose their home opener against their big rival, Nebraska, and if they lose to Colorado State at home, things like that, if they start to snowball, it'll be interesting to see. But I think that he has such the backing of these players that I do think he'll find a way to keep them together. He has not experienced a lot of losing, especially as a coach. But I think that he is the type of guy that can keep these guys together even through tough times if they happen to hit this year.
And this just kind of like opened up another line of questioning here as you were saying that there's such a cult of personality. And when you look at the transfer portal and NIL and all of these things, and you look at, I don't think that anybody around here expects Deion Sanders to be a lifer or anything close to it at Colorado, right? Is there almost a negative to the coach being so responsible for recruiting all of these new players? Or is it kind of a situation where Colorado just needs to kind of cash the checks while they can and not worry about the long-term impact?
Yeah, I think that's really it for this program right now. I mean, they've been so bad for so long that, I've said it before, no program in the country needed a jolt quite like Colorado did. I mean, they were so bad. And last year was really kind of rock bottom. And I mean, this is a program that it feels like it was a long time ago. 33 years ago, they won a national title. They had a Heisman Trophy winner in 1994. They were an elite program throughout the 90s. And that's a long time ago, but this was a proud
Not
program.
If you're an A&M fan. Like if you're an A&M fan, that's what they, 40 years ago, that's still pretty fresh. So
right. Yeah. And for a lot of Colorado fans, it is, right. That was my high school and college years. So, people remember that stuff. And this was a once proud program, and it's fallen on hard times, and they needed a jolt, especially after last year. So I really think that Colorado, whatever, if he's here for 1 year, 2 years, great. Just get us somewhere to where, we're relevant and respected finally, and win some games for us, because that's what they want. That's what they need. And if he's only here a couple of years, he leaves the program in a better spot. That's the hope.
Yeah. You talk about a program needing a jolt, and not to the depths that Colorado did, but TCU needed a jolt after 4 kind of subpar years. Under the final 4 years of Gary Patterson's tenure in Fort Worth, was not the program that had built itself up to be. Sonny Dykes came in and delivered that jolt. Mm-hmm. You actually had a chance. We're recording this on Monday night. This probably won't release until Wednesday. You had a chance to talk to Sonny Dykes today, I believe, and get about 15, 20 minutes with him as he prepares for Colorado. What do you kind of take away from your conversation with him, and what's the one thing that you think that he's really looking to in preparing for a team that really no one can prepare for, because nobody has any idea what to expect of the Buffaloes this fall?
Yeah. I told you too that I had a chance to chat with him briefly at Big 12 Media Day in person. And so that helped to kind of, he knew who I was a little bit, but he's such a down to earth guy. And I'm not saying one's good or bad, but it's such a contrast from Deion Sanders, and that, we don't have a whole lot of access to Deion Sanders because he's a celebrity. Right. And so I couldn't believe when, I didn't even suggest it, but TCU's sports info director was like, "Well, we can get him on the phone for you." I'm like, "Really? Okay." And then he was great, But I love Sonny, and I think his program would be easy to cover, by the way, from a media perspective. But he was very no nonsense about it, and just kind of like, "Hey, whatever. I mean, we're just ready to play some football." And I asked him about the challenges of scouting for this game, and he's like, "Yeah, we've watched more film than we ever have before for something like this, because you have to watch so many different layers of film to see everybody." But it was kind of like, yeah, whatever. It's just part of the deal. And then he kind of said, and then you have to be prepared for the fact that all this prep you're doing, you get to game day, and it's different anyway. And so I came away from it thinking, I think people make too much sometimes of scouting, because football is football sometimes. And these coaches, Sonny's coached a long time. Joe Gillespie's coached a long time, right? They just know how to adjust. And there's probably nothing that Colorado's going to do that they haven't seen. and there's nothing that TCU is going to do that Colorado coaches haven't seen. So it's really how you adjust and things like that. But I really like the approach, and I talked to Sonny about this game is interesting because I said you guys are coming off of being in the national championship game. Have you noticed? Has it just me, or has it felt like this game is all being hyped about Colorado? And he goes, no, that's about right.
Yeah.
And Colorado's the one getting the attention here. And he goes, I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
And he did mention, he thinks that the TCU players see that and that they've got a little chip on their shoulder because of that. But for the most part, he doesn't care. And he's like, fine, let Colorado have the spotlight. We just want to go out and play football.
Well, and at the end of the day, Colorado, TCU probably isn't hosting Big Game Saturday on Fox, Big Noon Saturday. I think that's the right way to say that. I've had a couple of missteps, but I had football practice today and it was over 100 degrees and it was miserable. So I think my brain has melted a little bit too. But
right.
But yeah, if it's not Colorado coming, right? And if it's Colorado of a year ago, it doesn't matter. TCU played a national championship. It's just the TCU got their butts handed to them by Georgia, not the TCU that's opening against Coach Prime. So I think you put all the attention on Colorado, but TCU really gets to reap the rewards here, which is kind of a win-win for the Horned Frogs.
And guess whose stadium gets to be?
Yeah, exactly.
It's TCU Stadium,
which is a gorgeous, beautiful, and I'm super biased, but you're going to see it for yourself here on Saturday as well. I think you'll come away again wanting to cover TCU because it is a delightful program and environment. Other than the fact it's going to be literally 105 around kickoff. So how important is this opener for Deion Sanders for Colorado? It doesn't necessarily have to be a win, but do they have to kind of redeem themselves a little bit with the national spotlight?
I think so. I didn't watch the NFL game on Sunday night, but saw the clip where Erin Andrews was doing a report where she talked about. Colorado was featured in that game, and she talked about what Colorado's going to wear, and she said that Coach Prime told her the players are going to wear sunglasses as they come out on the field. They're putting this spotlight, this target on themselves.
I hadn't heard that. Wow.
And they're going to be wearing. They were sort of teased a little bit. They're going to be wearing jerseys that we've never seen before from Colorado. So it's brand new jerseys that they haven't even officially been unveiled yet, but all white jerseys, gold numbers, which you've never seen before. That's what I'm hearing. Brand new cleats that even LeBron has, tweeted out that he needs to get a pair of those. So there's all this target on their back. Right. And so if you go out and get blown out, that's not a good look, but if you go out and you play fairly well and you're competitive and it's a game going into the fourth quarter, even if you lose by 17 points, but you're in it, I think that's a big deal. And that's a good thing for Colorado. And I don't think they need to win this game, to your point. If they win it, that's massive.
Yeah.
But if they're competitive, I think that really sets the table for what could be a nice year for them.
It's going to be really interesting. I didn't know that about the new uniforms or any of that too. The sunglasses. I will definitely be on the field early. I think for runouts for that. That's going to be something to behold. The whole spectacle around this game that you would not normally get for an opener between a program that was 1-11 right a season ago and another team that lost by 50 plus in the national championship game. It's immediately become one of the best and most exciting games of the weekend. All that being said, I'm going to put you on the spot. Okay. How do you see this one going? And if Colorado wins, how does it happen? If Colorado doesn't win, what did TCU do to keep them from doing so?
Well, before I give a prediction, I'll say if Colorado wins, it's because Shedeur Sanders has had a big game, number one, and it's because they've probably done something to cause some mistakes by TCU. They've got a pick six, or they've caused a couple turnovers, or they've returned something. You got a return touchdown, special teams touchdown type of deal. It's going to be something. I think they need something like that to win this game. But I do think TCU wins it. I think that TCU is the better team, and them being at home, I think that I give them the edge. I think it'll be a competitive game. I see TCU winning, by 10 to 14 points, something like that. Nothing like last year where it was 38-13. But I think, to me, the interesting thing is going to be you're going to see if Colorado can stop the run, because I'm worried about that run defense a little bit, and I know TCU can run the football. And so if TCU is going to blow them out or win this thing, I think they've got to run the football. If TCU can't run the ball, I think Colorado wins the game.
Well, and it's going to be interesting, too, because, we talk about all the pieces Colorado's replacing. TCU sent 8 guys to the NFL. They're replacing 3 offensive linemen. They picked up one from Jackson State and Willis Patrick. You're replacing your quarterback, you're replacing your first round wide receiver, you're replacing both of your lead running backs. So there are plenty of questions for TCU on the offensive side of the ball. I think that TCU defense is really good, but Shedeur Sanders certainly presents an interesting challenge for that group. But offensively, can TCU put up enough points to blow them out? I thought the spread was really, really high. I think it's like 20.5. That felt like a little bit egregious for a team that has a lot of question marks in and of itself. I think I'm with you. I think TCU wins. I don't know. You've kind of changed my mind a little bit though, because I feel like if given the opportunity, knowing all the things Colorado's doing to put that target on their back, TCU might kept their foot on the gas a little bit longer than they intended to, based on all those things. That'll be interesting to see. Last question while we have you, and since this is a future Big 12 rivalry, what do you expect Colorado's record to be this fall?
That's a tough one. I have never really committed to a specific record. I've always said I think they'll win between 4 and 7 games. And I will say this: the over/under that I've seen is 3.5. Mm-hmm. And I think if Shedeur Sanders is healthy for 12 games, he's too good for them to win. For them to win less than 3.5 games. So they're going to be over if he's healthy, because I think he's that good. He makes that big of a difference. How much over 4 games? I don't know. But I think that they can be a bowl team if he's as good as advertised and if Travis Hunter's as good as advertised. I've kind of in my mind settled around 5 and 7 with that chance to get to 6 and 6. So I have them right around there, but I guess I'll go 5 and 7 and maybe they steal that 6th game somewhere.
And hopefully they don't steal it in Fort Worth. Brian,
I'll say this: if they win on Saturday, I think they're a definite bowl team.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. I think that can be such a tone setter for the positive, but it's also an easy one to wipe away if it's a negative. Right. It's not really there's not much of a lose opportunity there for Deion Sanders. He can spin that a lot of different ways, but if they come out and shock TCU, that's going to make waves. And
that sort of answers your previous question, right? About how big is this game? I think it can set the tone big time for Colorado's season, but it doesn't necessarily set it in a negative way.
Yeah. And if you're TCU and you lose this game, it unravels everything early.
Right.
So there's a ton of pressure on the Horned Frogs. No one's talking about it, but there's a ton of pressure on the Horned Frogs to handle business at home. Right. Brian, thank you so much for your time. Tell people where they can find your work and where they can find that interview with Sonny Dykes.
Yeah, buffzone.com is where a lot of my work is. And then on Twitter or X or whatever it's called, at Brian Howell 33. And at Buffzone, there's an article today, well, on Monday as we're doing this, about Sonny. He's talking about just kind of how they scouted Colorado. But there's going to be more on that. There was a lot of stuff I got from Sonny, and there will be more later on this week on buffzone.com.
And Brian is a great follow on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Great insight, a guy that you're going to want to be following now, TCU fans, because he is the guy for Colorado, and Colorado is a future member of the Big 12 and a team that TCU will have to pay attention to for the foreseeable future, not just this season, but well beyond. And I think TCU fans are all hoping that we get another return trip to Boulder ASAP, because that was a great weekend for Horned Frog fans. Not just the game, but anytime you have an excuse to go to Colorado, it's a good time. It's a good place.
Got to take it.
Got to take it. Thanks so much, Brian. We appreciate your time and your insight, and look forward to welcoming you to Fort Worth this weekend.
We'll see you this weekend.
Big thanks to Brian for his time. This season is incredibly busy, and I'm super thankful that he took time to talk to Melissa and give us a little bit of a preview of what we can expect from Colorado on Saturday. I want to take a moment, though, and talk a little bit about some of our sponsors, because we do have 2 absolutely unbelievable sponsors on this program. Very thankful for both of them for their participation in our show in a variety of ways. First and foremost, with Hell's Half Acre. Hell's Half Acre Sporting Goods is a brand that was created with Horned Frog fans in mind, and each item sold makes a direct impact on TCU students. I'm actually wearing Hell's Half Acre right now. I've got the Football Champions of 1938 shirt on. It's got a cool design on the back, very comfortable fit, not too baggy, feels more like a fitted tee than just like a box cut kind of standard square tee. Fits really, really well. Size is the size I normally get. I didn't have to size up or down. Super comfortable. Excellent fit here for this shirt. You can check out all of their TCU gear, though, which is all from game day polos to shirts to headwear, home goods. Go to hellshalfacresg.com. Make sure you check out all of their merch, all of their products that are TCU designed. And again, they benefit TCU student athletes as well. Super excited for them to be a partner of the show. Very excited to kind of grow that partnership throughout the football season. We've got some cool stuff kind of cooking, and very excited about all of that. So hellshalfacresg.com. That's the place to go to grab your game day polo, hat, and more. So head over there today. And what's one apparel company without another? Because we also love Home Field Apparel. They've been a longtime sponsor of the show. They're a Republic of Football Network sponsor as well. So any Republic of Football Network show that you hear, you're going to hear about Home Field Apparel. That's one of the really cool things about this company, is that they put their money where their mouth is when it comes to supporting the industry that is college football, the sport that is college football, and the people that cover this sport. Very thankful for Home Field Apparel. With them, you're going to get some incredibly soft t-shirts and hoodies. I love their hoodies. They're my favorite hoodies in the game. You guys have heard about my Big Sky Conference hoodie. I've got a couple TCU hoodies. I've got some Arkansas hoodies as well, getting back to my roots on that one. And they are my favorite hoodies to rock for almost any occasion when appropriate. I throw them on in the summer when I'm cranking the AC up in my house. I love their hoodies a ton. If you go over to homefieldapparel.com right now, you can use the code FROGSIN15 for 15% off your first purchase and 10% off your second purchase and beyond. That's FROGSIN15 to get 15% off your first purchase at homefieldapparel.com. Two great sponsors, two excellent sponsorship reads, if I do say so myself. But with that, let's get into a little bit of mailbag. You guys did a great job, as you have all summer, of asking questions, both at hornfrogblitz.com, on the message boards, and on Twitter. Thank you. You guys asked some awesome questions this week. Let's dive in and just start getting after it here. Paul, which one of the best screen names I've seen on Horned Frog Blitz, excellent ticket reference, by the way, asks, will Bubba score a touchdown this year? I love Bubba. I love his story. I love his journey to TCU, a local kid who's committed to the Horned Frogs, moved across the Metroplex from South Oak Cliff to come over and play for TCU. He isn't going to see the field this year, though. Let's just be super clear about that. And I'll be honest. All right, I have some feelings about how and why he's blowing up on social media. I can understand the fascination around Bubba, but for me, I don't know. I have a weird hang up about highlighting a kid because of his weight. I'll just be completely honest with you there. I've been around kids from my youth ministry days who didn't always have access to healthy food or regular nutritional options or education on how to take care of yourself physically. We've got to remember that so often kids don't have any control over their living situations, their food situations. And so when we're talking about a young guy who, when we're making a kid go viral because of his weight, I hesitate to participate in that. I don't know about his story specifically, so maybe none of that applies. But there are other things to highlight about Bubba besides his weight. I know that he's down a good amount since getting on campus, and the staff has been really intentional about helping him get to a healthier weight, not just for football, but just for general health and well-being. And then from a football standpoint, he's a long-term project, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think, especially because of the prevalence of the transfer portal, we expect new faces on campus to be productive players right away, when the majority of freshmen are developmental players. They're not going to play right away. And there's a question later in this Q&A that I can talk about that a little bit more. But from a football standpoint, he's a project. Everything I've heard about Bubba, though, is that he's a great kid. He lights up a room. He's got an excellent personality, a ton of energy. And I would love to see more stories about that side of Bubba rather than just, making him a national name because of his current size. I know this was a lighthearted question, by the way, Paul. I just turns out I needed to get up on my soapbox for a minute. But But there's that. So the Ivor asks, who would win in a fight, 1,000 horned frogs or 2 buffaloes? Have you ever seen a buffalo? Like, Ivor, have you ever seen an actual buffalo in person? They're huge. I mean, there's one that runs around the field up at Colorado. And have you ever seen a horned frog? They're like this big, man. They fit in your hand. Like, they're so small. I don't know that 1,000 would be enough to take down one buffalo, let alone 2. Fortunately, though, it's not a battle of the mascots on Saturday. So I don't think TCU will have to worry about that. Life of a Frog asks a couple of questions here. Give me Morris over under and passing yards for this one, setting at 200. So over under 200 passing yards for Chandler Morris. I think we'll want to establish the run game in this one, so that might limit his numbers. I agree that the run game will be a big factor in this game, but I think TCU is going to be able to challenge Colorado's secondary, especially the safeties, those inside corners, and then the linebackers as well. I think the slot receivers and tight ends for TCU are really dangerous. And I think they ultimately get Morris to the over on that. So I'm going to take over 200 passing yards for Morris in this game. Another one from Life of a Frog, lovingly known as Loaf over on the site, by the way. If TCU doesn't cover the 20.5 spread, it's probably because the Buffs were able to have success at blank. For this one, I'm going to say keeping Shedeur Sanders upright. I think if TCU is able to bully Colorado up front in the trenches, it's going to be a long day for that Buffalo offense. If Sanders has time, though, to make plays, especially with his legs, I think Colorado can keep it relatively close and cover the spread. And they've got some talented guys at receiver, too, right? Like, if you're not able to throw this Colorado offense off its rhythm, I wouldn't be shocked to see them put up some points. Do I think that that's how this game goes? Not necessarily, but if Colorado's going to cover and keep it close, they've got the horses to do it. I just don't know how their offensive line is going to hold up throughout this game. And the last one from Loaf, predict who will be this game's alpha frog on both sides of the ball. All right, I'm going to go with Jared Wiley on offense. I've said it all offseason, and I know Jeremy has said this over on the site as well and on the Frogcast, and Melissa said this as well. This Kendall Briles offense is going to feature a ton of Jared Wiley. It relies a lot on the tight end to do a couple of different things. I think just in this game alone, Wiley presents a huge mismatch for Colorado. He's 6'7", 260. Colorado doesn't have anybody on the defensive side of the ball who can answer that challenge. So I think Jared Wiley's primed to have a really big day on offense for the Frogs. Defensively, I went back and forth on a couple different guys, but I'm going to go with Mark Perry on this one. I kind of feel like Perry has been the forgotten man in TCU's secondary for this entire fall camp. He was second on the team in tackles last year, but all of the conversation this fall has been around Bud Clark and his availability, the Josh Foster and Nook Bradford competition. And meanwhile, there's Mark Perry just kind of going about his business, doing his thing. He's, to me, he reminds me a lot of like an emotional constant for this secondary. He helps kind of balance out Bud Clark's high energy and Josh Newton's emotion. And, you need that in a unit like this to keep everybody focused on doing your job, the next play, one play at a time, all the kind of cliche stuff. I think Mark Perry is that balance and that constant for this TCU back end that is going to help them take their game to the next level this season. I think you see that in his gameplay. He's consistently in the right spot, especially against the run and in that short and intermediate passing game. And so I expect Mark Perry to come out and remind everybody why he had 84 tackles last year and was a big part of the success TCU had in a pass defense standpoint. Take a sip of water here real quick. All right, TCU ball 3. Should we expect to see Josh Foster start on Saturday? If so, how short is the leash? Yes, I think we will see Josh Foster start. When you watch fall camp and when you read reports out of fall camp and you hear over and over and over again that Foster's running with the ones, he's getting the bulk of the first team reps ahead of Bradford, I think that's a pretty good indicator of who's going to start. I don't know as far as the short leash goes, I don't necessarily think he'll have a short leash, but I do think we'll see plenty of Bradford on the field. If you think back to the secondary last year, there were 5 or 6 guys who saw a significant number of live reps. And I don't think that necessarily changes this year, even with Namdi Obiezor moving down to the linebacker position, because you've got Perry, you've got Clark, you've got Foster, you've got Bradford. We've seen a lot of Chase Biddle this fall as well, getting some of those first-team free safety reps when Bud Clark was out for a little while there. And he filled in pretty nicely, had a couple good pass breakups. There are a couple other guys who I'm forgetting about right now, probably, who had good fall camps, who are gonna work their way into some time as well. So I don't know that if he comes out, it will necessarily be because he had a short leash, but just because in this heat and because you have some significant depth there, you're going to do your best to keep everybody as fresh as possible for later in the game. Papoose 13. Papoose is another good name, by the way. What personnel surprises might you anticipate? Is Colorado's squad really as small as they appeared to be during their nationally televised game? Well, I don't know that you can necessarily anticipate a surprise, but I'm really intrigued to see how the snap count breaks out at defensive end. I think it's pretty clear at this point that Caleb Fox and Paulo Iwale are going to get the starts. I don't have any clue what that rotation is going to look like, though. You can assume Caleb Fox, Paulo, and Dom Williams are going to be your starting linemen. I do think that generally TCU has a size advantage in the trenches on the defensive side of the ball, offensive side of the ball as well, frankly, when you start to talk about Colorado's size. But let's not fall into the trap that other schools have fallen into against TCU, where you just measure the linemen and chalk it up as a win for the bigger team, right? Because every time TCU has played a Big Ten team, basically, Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl, Michigan in the Fiesta Bowl, Ohio State a couple years back, even Purdue fell into this conversation a couple times. They thought that the size of their lines automatically created a win for them. Size is important, but you need a little motion of the ocean too. I think TCU's got that. I think that the Horned Frogs do have a legitimate advantage in the trenches. I don't think that it's exclusively because of their size. I think it's because of the depth that they've got. I think it's because of some of the veteran leadership that they've got, specifically in Brandon Coleman and Andrew Coker. And I think from a talent standpoint, they're a little bit ahead of where Colorado is on the offensive and defensive line at this point too. So I do give TCU the edge from a size perspective, from a talent perspective, especially in the trenches. I don't discredit Colorado's ability at those positions simply because they measure a little bit smaller. I think I did a good job of clarifying where I stand so that if a Colorado fan hears this, they can't come after me for that. They probably still will, though. There was a guy in the comments on YouTube the other day snipping and sniping. Pretty confident that Colorado's going to win. We'll see if he comes back to the site after Saturday. 901 Frog, will we ever get a depth chart? Well, we'll get one in week 2. Now, this is exactly how Sonny Dykes approached the depth chart last year. We didn't see anything until after the Colorado game. We kind of suspected that was because there was this quarterback competition between Max Duggan and Chandler Morris, and he didn't want to give away who was going to be the starter, even though people who were out at fall camp told y'all all fall last year, Chandler Morris looked better. Chandler Morris is probably going to win the job. Chandler Morris is probably going to be the week 1 starter. Lo and behold, he was. But I don't know that this is necessarily any kind of tactic from Sonny. I just think that he will drop a depth chart in week 2. And that's kind of what that is. I will say this, kind of call back to that Horned Frog Blitz 50% off subscription that you can get right now. If you've been reading the site, you should have a pretty good idea of who's going to start where. And if you've been listening to this podcast, especially the 45 hot takes and the 40 big questions episodes, should have a pretty good idea of who's going to be starting and where they're going to be starting for the Horned Frogs come Saturday against Colorado. Wag the Frog asks, who do you think are TCU's most and least favorable matchups against Colorado? This is a good question, and there are a couple different directions I could go. I think the most competitive matchup we'll see between these two teams is between Colorado's corners and TCU's outside wide receivers. Travis Hunter is a really great athlete. There's no way around it. He's an incredible two-way player. Does he have P5 experience? Not yet, but he was the number one recruit in his class for a reason, right? And he was going to Florida State for a reason before he ended up at Jackson State with Dion. I'm very excited to see him on the field Saturday. I want to see those matchups between him and Savion, and him and Dalen Wright, and him and maybe even Cordell Russell, and just Warren Thompson in that mix as well, and just see them kind of get after it. I think that's probably one of the more even position matchups in this contest. Colorado still has a question mark at the other outside corner spot. I don't know who that's going to be, except I don't think it's going to end up being a lot of Cormani McClain, which was the rumor earlier in Colorado's fall camp. So we'll see who that is. But that's the one that I think is most even. And like I said earlier, I think TCU's most favorable matchups are in the trenches. I think their offensive line is going to be able to move Colorado's defensive line. I think the interior strength of TCU's defensive line with Williams and Deal and Tymon Mitchell, I think it'll make itself felt in a good way for the Horned Frogs, be a disruptor, keep Colorado's offense off of its timing a little bit. TRF51 asks, do you get to talk to some of the media who made the comment about how none of our wide receivers would be good enough to play for Colorado? If so, I hope you do. And when we kick their blank this Saturday, I hope that you can have some of them on and have them explain themselves. I'll be honest, I haven't talked to too many Colorado people. I did a Locked On Buffs podcast a week or two ago to kind of preview this game a little bit. I haven't talked to the guy that wrote that Sports Illustrated article. I don't want to spend a ton of time on that article, to be completely honest with you, but I will say this. Personally, as someone who covers TCU, who's been around the program for a long time, and who also is an alum of the university, I don't think that's unknown at this point. I graduated from TCU. I love TCU, and now I cover them as a reporter, quote unquote reporter, serious media person. But I try to straddle the line between these two groups that I think exist in this kind of college sports media realm. One of which approaches college football as an industry, which it is. And this group kind of thinks that there's a level of seriousness with which we should report about things, break things down in a way that gives people insight into what the outcome could be on any given day. I think gambling has had a big influence on this style of reporting and analysis as well. And I don't think there's really a fault with this group. This is just the way they approach reporting on college football. The other camp kind of treats college football more like a game, which it also is, right? And I think there should be space for people to have fun, to take shots at rivals, to let the personalities that make college football great shine through kind of the more mundane, factual, newsy style of storytelling. I think there's space for both of those styles of reporting, and I think there are people in this industry that do a brilliant job of blending those things together. And I'm really appreciative of those examples that I have for how I go about doing my kind of take on this whole thing. But the stuff in that article that was making the rounds that a lot of people were getting fired up about, it doesn't fit into either of those categories, in my opinion. Because at its core, it's just simply not based in reality. And it doesn't serve as a way for people to better understand Colorado. It certainly doesn't provide any kind of accurate analysis of the matchups that we'll see on Saturday. It doesn't feature any of those fun personalities of either team. It's just a fan writing about a team and taking cheap shots at players, making assessments that are completely uninformed. It was a think piece that in my mind was not grounded in any kind of reason or reality. And so I'll be completely honest with you, that stuff isn't really worth my time these days as far as engaging with it goes. There's nothing productive about that. for me. There's nothing fun about that for me that can come out of an interaction with someone who thinks like that or writes like that. There's just no point to that, because I feel like in the end, I would be spending my time trying to bring that person back into reality to have a legitimate conversation that could be fun or productive or both. But in my experience, that hasn't been the case. So I tend not to engage with that kind of stuff. That's my 2 cents. Y'all know me. I love to have fun, right? Like, I know how to push Texas Tech fan base's buttons. We saw that all summer. We saw that last year. But at the end of the day, I think it's important to also try to look at things from a relatively objective perspective, and also really important to keep in mind that players and coaches and their families consume a lot of this content, and that shouldn't dictate what you say about a team or a player, but I think it should dictate how you say it, right? And so that's just my 2 cents. I'm not going to waste any more time on that article. I tweeted a kind of a subtweet about it. It's just unhinged and not grounded in reality. So moving along, Ludacliff asks 2 questions. Yeah, you asked one, man. You asked one on the forum, and you asked one on Twitter. You can just put them all in one place, brother. It's all right. First question: will you be purchasing my remaining stock of Chance Nolan hats? I'm down so bad right now. Please help. All right, folks, if you've known me for a long enough time, you know that I like to invest in backup quarterbacks, specifically second-string quarterbacks. This goes all the way back to my undergraduate time at TCU. I remember, so this is my sophomore year. You'll be able to date me based on this story. Jeff Ballard was the starter, and I went down to Waco for the season opener, and it was against Baylor in that awful old stadium that they had that was nowhere near their campus. So say what you will about McLean Stadium now, it is a definite upgrade over what they had. But even though Ballard started, I saw a freshman that really impressed me that day. His name was Marcus Jackson. He came in, threw 2 second-half touchdowns, including an 80-yard touchdown to Aaron Brown. Frogs won that game 17-7. Went on to be 11-2 that year. I think they beat Northern Illinois in their bowl game, like by 30 or something like that. I was all aboard the Marcus Jackson train. I bought a ton of Marcus Jackson stock. And then that next year, when Marcus Jackson wasn't quite cutting it, I bought some stock in another young kid by the name of Andy Dalton. We all know how that story ends. And so I say that to say this. Second-string quarterbacks, they're like bonds, right? They're good long-term investments. They won't lose you a ton of money. They might not make you the most money either, but they're a good, stable investment. But Luda, brother, third-string quarterbacks, it's like crypto, man. Boom or bust. You got to stay away from those. So I can't buy a Chance Nolan hat, big guy. I'm wearing a hat currently, so sorry about that. But I hope you find a way to offload those Chance Nolan hats somewhere on the blockchain. Luda's next question, though, this one comes from Twitter. Came with a really cool picture of a coffee mug that had a slogan on it. And Luda asks, are you going to do your job? And if so, how hard are you going to do your job? Luda, brother, I'm going to do my job so hard. People will look back on this 2023 season and say, that was the hardest anyone has ever done their job. I hope that answers your question. Also, hit me up because I need one of those coffee mugs. Cuckoo for TCU. Who scores the first TD for the Frogs and who gets the first turnover? I think Amani Bailey gets the first touchdown, rushing touchdown after a nice long drive by the Frogs. First turnover, I'm going to say Jamoy Hodge forces a fumble, and Johnny Hodges recovers it. That's what we're going with. Frog asks, what's your conviction level in the win you forecasted? Assign percentages to the likelihood of these outcomes. All right, he's got 5 outcomes here. The first one is win by more than 30. I'm going to give that 10%. Win by 21-30. I'm going to give that 65%. I'm going to try and keep track of the math in my head here. Win by 11-20. which means that TCU doesn't cover, 15%. What am I at? I'm at 90% with two categories to go. Win between 1 and 10 points, 5%, and then lose 5%. What did I say? Win by more than 30, 10%. Win by 21 to 30, 65%. Win by 11 to 20, 15%. Win by 1 to 10, 5%, and lose 5%. Those are my conviction levels. I think TCU covers. I don't think it's like 50 to nothing or anything like that. First game, right? A lot of new pieces on this TCU team. Even more new pieces on this Colorado team. I don't think it's going to be like the biggest, highest scoring game we're going to see. The unders have been hitting a lot in week 0. We're gonna see if the unders continue to hit in week 1. I think they will for a lot of teams around the country. You factor in the heat as well. All of the hype that's been around this game. I don't think it's going to be the cleanest game we've seen from TCU, and we haven't seen a game from this Colorado team yet, so I don't really know what to expect. Beverly Hills Ninja, JJ LaFond on Twitter asks, does the QB edge go to Morris or Sanders? What scares you most about Colorado and Deion? JJ is a Michigan writer who I got to chat with about the Fiesta Bowl last winter. Really good dude. Thankful for you, man, and thankful for this question. I give the edge to Chandler Morris right now. Because he's got Power 5 experience. I think that's pretty much the biggest factor in this one. He's got a couple years under his belt at the P5 level. He understands what's expected of him from a leadership standpoint, from a running the offense standpoint, and he's gone out and he's done it a couple times. So I give it to Morris. That being said, I think Shedeur Sanders is a perfectly fine quarterback. I think he's got good talent. He's a capable runner. He's a good passer. He's got some weapons on the outside that I think are going to really help him out. He's got a good, experienced running back who is coming off of an injury last year, who I think could make some hay as well. But right now, I'll give Morris the edge just because of that experience. Let's see. What scares me most about Deion and Colorado? I think it's not an on-field thing. I think the hype around their program is the thing that worries me the most about Colorado and Deion, because the conversation all offseason about this game in particular has been about Deion and about Colorado and about, resurrecting a program. And there has been little to no mention of TCU actually even playing in this football game. And you could kind of hear it on Tuesday from the players that were talking at media availability, and you've heard it throughout the fall as well. They want to remind people that they made it to the college football playoff last year. They want to remind people that they are a team that could legitimately contend for the Big 12 year over year once Texas and Oklahoma leave. And I wonder if they come out a little too amped because they want to remind everyone of all that stuff. They want to remind people that they're 3 touchdown favorites for a reason, right? And that could probably lead to some silly mistakes, letting Colorado hang around and giving them a sense of, hey, maybe we could actually pull off this upset and come away 1-0 this year. Jared Becker asks, I understand that TCU has a new OC and lost 3 wide receivers to the NFL. Why do people say that the wide receivers are unproven? Savion and JP have proven they can play at a high level. JoJo and Warren are maybes from the SEC. Why does TCU have a narrative that the wide receivers are a team weakness? I like the wide receiver room. Jared, I think you answered your own question there a little bit. People tend to stay surface level when they're evaluating rosters for other teams at the beginning of the season. I think they're just going to look at, all right, this team lost X number of players to the NFL or to the transfer portal or whatever, and they replaced them with these players. All right, let me look at their baseline stats from last year. And there isn't much context to the numbers. There isn't much context to the how and the why and the when and the where of the production of some of those guys. And so the assumption is, they lost 3 receivers to the NFL draft. That position group as a whole is going to take a step back. I don't think that that's necessarily an unreasonable position to take from an outside viewpoint. And I don't think, I don't think that TCU has anyone on the roster that is a Quentin Johnston replacement. At least not right now. Cordell probably has the best chance of becoming that in the long run. But I think this year you're talking about replacing Quentin Johnston's production in the aggregate, right? So you're talking about getting something from Dalen Wright, getting something from Savion Williams, Cordell Russell being a part of that, Warren Thompson being a part of that, all the way down to Chase Jackson and Blake Nowell being a part of that as far as outside receivers who are producing for this offense. We'll definitely see a rotation of receivers because of the depth that they've got. All of those outside receivers I just listed, Jalen Robinson is another one there, right? He's arguably the fastest guy on the team, and he's healthy, which makes me think he can maybe get back to more of the way he looked in 2020 at Central Florida than the 2 years after that at Central Florida and Ole Miss. Plus the inside receivers that they've got, right? JP Richardson, JP JoJo, all these other guys that I think are just incredibly talented. None of them are Quentin Johnston. None of them have to be Quentin Johnston either. And so when you pay as close attention to one team as we do, and obviously there might be a little bit of bias there as well, you tend to think that this is a wide receivers room that can go 11, 12 deep, right? How that bears out in a football game, I'm not terribly sure yet, but I do think that there's plenty of talent in that wide receiver room and that it will be a strength for this team this year. Redgrave09 asks, will the Buffs walk in with sunglasses and almonds now that Deion has his own California Almonds NIL deal? Will Deion find a way to mention California Almonds on TV? This gives me vibes of Entourage when Vince does a shout out to Rufus during his interview with Jimmy Kimmel to get a free home studio. Redgrave, I'm going to give you my best Michael Scott impression right now from that episode of The Office where he starts watching Entourage. Please hold. Entourage. That's all I got. Go hear a frog. What % of the new Colorado fans will move on to some other bandwagon once TCU wins by 30? Well, I think the Deion loyalty will persevere through one game. I think the conversation will shift, though, right? To, this is year one rebuild. Let's establish some culture, yada, yada, yada. Frankly, a lot of the same conversations TCU were having this time last offseason, right? Like TCU fans were very much Sonny's going to build something. We got to give him time to build it. He's establishing a culture. All of the same kind of conversations that I think we've heard from Colorado fans a little bit and will continue to hear throughout the rest of year one in Deion's coaching career there. Year one for TCU under Sonny Dykes was not the norm for programs who have coaching changes. And I think a lot of schools around the country saw that year one success and said, well, TCU can do it. We can probably do it too. And I think we're going to see that that's not the norm this year, especially with teams like Colorado, probably Nebraska to an extent with year one of Matt Rule, who plays Colorado in week 2, by the way. I'm very interested in that game. A few other schools around the country are probably going to experience something similar as well, like Cincinnati is another one that comes to mind. There might be some year one programs that have some good success. Think about Luke Fickell up at Wisconsin. That's a program that could make some noise in the Big Ten this season. But just people got to remember that TCU year one under Sonny Dykes was not the norm. You can't expect to go win 13 games in year one with a new head coach, especially after the amount of turnover that Colorado has had this offseason. 615 Frog asks, what should our expectations be for the freshman class, specifically Jonathan Bax? Specific to Bax, I think we'll see him in a rotation at linebacker, and that will be exactly what he needs to be this year. When you think about TCU's linebacker depth a season ago, and you look at the snap counts that Johnny Hodges and Jamoy Hodge and D. Winters had by the end of that season, it's a miracle, frankly, that they made it through that season as uninjured as they did. I mean, they were pretty banged up at times. Hodges was dragging himself around the football field at times last year. The fact that we have guys like Jonathan Bax on this roster now who can contribute in a rotational way, the fact that you've got Shad Banks on that 2 deep, that Marcel Brooks is back and healthy, I think TCU is set up much better at the linebacker position this year than they were last year, in spite of losing D Winters. And it's similar to that wide receiver room argument, right? Where you had one guy who's a really big name who's no longer here, but there are a couple guys who maybe by an aggregate could reproduce what you were getting from that one guy. Kind of a Moneyball situation in a way. It's not as efficient probably as just having one dude who can do all of that. But the other side of that coin is, well, you've got a couple guys who can give some of those starters more of a reprieve. And, I hate to keep harping on the weather, but it's going to be hot on Saturday. And you don't want guys out there for 60, 70, 80 snaps. You want them out there for 45 to 55. And that can make a huge difference when you've got an entire 2 deep at linebacker to rotate in and out to keep some of those starters fresh a little bit longer into that game. But this also, so that's Jonathan Bax, that's the linebackers. I think we'll see a good number of freshmen play depth roles this year. Bax is one of those, certainly. Like I said, Marcus Deal and Zachary Chapman along the defensive line are others. Cordell Russell at receiver, who I've talked about a couple times already today, that's definitely one as well. But we need to remember, and I mentioned this earlier in the show, the majority of freshmen still need time to develop into players who can contribute at the college level, especially for teams that are expected to compete at a high level in the Power 5, which is what TCU is trying to do. You can't rely on young players all of the time. And you hear Jamie Dixon talk about this from a basketball standpoint too. You need those veteran guys who have done it before to lead the team. That's why we've seen Sonny Dykes and his staff be so intentional about the way they're addressing needs in the transfer portal. They've gone out both years and gotten veteran talent that can come into this building, help supplement the players that they're working on developing, and establish kind of a leadership hierarchy of, hey, this is what's expected of you. This is how you go about your business. This is how we do things at TCU, and help lead those younger guys a little bit more. You can't depend on youth, and you don't see many programs in the country depending on youth at the level that I think people expect freshmen to just be able to come in and play and perform, right? There are those teams like Bama and Georgia and Ohio State and Michigan to a degree now, Clemson, maybe not as much recently, but in past years, who you look across their roster and, yeah, maybe they've got a freshman or a sophomore quarterback or a freshman wide receiver or a D end or something, but the majority of those teams are juniors who are elite level players who have developed for a couple of years in the program and in the system. And now they're going out there and they're feasting, right? That's the level that TCU needs to get to, and that's why we've seen Sonny Dykes approach high school recruiting and the transfer portal the way that he has, is because he understands the formula to get TCU to where those other teams are from a talent standpoint, from a development standpoint, and from a transfer portal standpoint. So there are a lot of freshmen that I think could have an impact this year. But if we get to the point where TCU is overly reliant on freshmen, I think that becomes a problem in and of itself. Army Frog Fan asks, is Cordell far enough along to expect to see him get a jump ball or two in the red zone? I think so, right? I think as far as red zone targets go, there's probably a long line in front of him. Jared Wiley, Savion Williams, Dalen Wright, J.P. Richardson, JoJo Earl, Jalen Robinson, I think all maybe are ahead of him for red zone targets right now. Chase Curtis is probably on that list as well as the second tight end. DeAndre Rogers, probably another tight end that's in that conversation. But he is an athletic big target who can go up and high point the ball. We saw that all fall camp. Like as soon as the guy got on campus, he was making plays like that. And I just don't know where he sits as far as depth is concerned, but I wouldn't be shocked to see him out there. I wouldn't be shocked to see him out there at all. JD Cashin asks, aside from Hunter, exactly how well did Colorado do in the transfer portal? Did they replace last year's team with a bunch of all-stars like we're hearing? Well, they certainly replaced in bulk. I think they brought in like 50 guys from the portal this offseason. It's pretty unheard of. As far as the talent goes for those portal players, I think they did well. They're not all 4 stars. but that's not a reasonable or realistic expectation for any team, frankly, to bring in former 4-stars left and right. And I think a lot of these guys still have some developing to do. I don't know how much you can do in one offseason when so many guys are coming from so many different places and all trying to learn the same system at the same time. It's such a unique situation that Colorado finds itself in for a variety of different reasons that, I have no doubt that there are some guys on that roster that are very talented. I mean, you've got Hunter, like you mentioned, you've got Shadur Sanders. Some of the guys they got from like Washington and Tennessee and Florida State should all be good contributors. The South Florida receivers they got have some hype around them. The running back that they got has some hype around him too. But I think it's really important to remember this is the first time these guys are playing a live game together. It could very well turn out to be a talented team down the road. There's certainly a good group of kids, but week one, when everything is still new, against TCU, in Texas in that heat, as your first game experience together is such a huge challenge. It's just such a huge challenge. And I think that more than anything else is why people are favoring TCU by as much as they are in this game. There is, I think, a general talent gap between the two teams. And I think that, along with all of the other underlying circumstances, are why we see the line where it is for this game, which is at 20.5. Frog Fan Fever. What will the running back and wide receiver rotations look like, particularly wide receiver, where there are like 12 or 13 guys right now who on paper could reasonably get playing time? All right, I hit this a little bit. I'm going to run it real quick, though. At running back, I think the rotation is going to be Bailey, Sanders, who's on a pitch count, Corey Wren, Trent Battle. We know Cam Cook won't play. Sonny Dykes said as much in his Tuesday press conference. He's dealing with a minor injury. Bailey, Sanders, Wren, Battle in that order at running back. The first wave of wide receivers that I expect to see: Savion Williams, J.P. Richardson, JoJo Earl, Warren Thompson. Jamie, why Warren Thompson? He's played in Kendall Bryle's system for the last 3 years. He's talked about being a guy who's translated a lot of this offense for other wide receivers, and he had a very good fall camp. That's why I think Warren Thompson ahead of some other guys. We will also definitively see Jalen Robinson, Chase Jackson, Cordell Russell, Dylan Wright, and Jack Besh. We're going to see all of those guys. There's a very good chance that we're going to see DJ Allen and Major Everhart as well. That's 11 receivers, I think, that I just mentioned. And that doesn't include the playing time that Jared Wiley and Chase Curtis are going to get. That doesn't include the possibility of seeing DeAndre Rogers at tight end as well. That's 14 deep pass catchers, not including running backs out of the backfield, that Chandler Morris is going to be able to throw to, that Kendall Bryles has to figure out what that rotation looks like. A wealth of talent. I don't envy him trying to find snaps for everybody. That's a tough job. Michael Wagner, TC Wags, asks, what do you think the splits will be on offense? Will we be a run-first team, percentage between running and passing plays? I'll say 60-40 run to pass, especially early on this season. It's a good way to get the offensive line into a rhythm when you're trying to introduce 3 new starters on that line, especially against a defensive line that will be on a little bit on the smaller side. It won't give that D-line an opportunity to maybe use speed to disrupt the passing game as much if you establish that run. It'll force Colorado to maybe move the linebackers up a little bit more to help with the run, and that might open up some things in other areas. So it's kind of my thought process there. J.K. Swint asks, if you had to pick one TCU player to start on your college fantasy football team this week, who would it be? Give me J.P. Richardson. I picked Jared Wiley earlier on the show to be my frog dog, or whatever, alpha frog. I think from a fantasy standpoint, the number of catches that JP's potentially going to have, the number of yards, potentially a score, I think he's the fantasy option 1. I think Jared Wiley's fantasy option 2 for me this week. Sanju, at Sanju Singh, asks, do you think Josh Hoover will get some plays if TCU is winning with the bigger margin? I would love to see him get some playing time and be ready in case of any uncertainties. I think it's safe to say that if TCU is up by 3 or more touchdowns in the fourth quarter, we'll see Josh Hoover play, along with some of the younger wide receivers, some of the younger offensive linemen. But it's a balance, though, really. I mean, on the one hand, you're trying to get the first-team guys as many live reps as you can in a new offense. And on the other hand, having some guys with experience who are typically going to be your backups is also a good thing. But you realize, too, you don't have to get it all done in week 1. If they're winning big against Colorado, they do have the option to do that, the opportunity to get some other guys some time. But you're also playing Nichols in week 2. It's an FCS opponent. That's a pay-to-win game, to be completely honest. Like, if we're just being blunt, that's a game TCU's going to win, and they're going to win by a massive margin. So you also have that opportunity in week 2 to get some guys a good number of live reps, to get some backups, some more playing time. And then you head into that week 3 matchup hosting SMU, feeling pretty good about where you are with your depth and with your roster as a whole. Man, that was a lot of questions. We knocked them all out, though. Thank you for asking them, whether that was on hornfrogblitz.com or on Twitter. Shout out to all of you for doing that. Shout out to Melissa for sitting down with Brian Howell of buffzone.com. You can find all of his reading over there at buffzone.com. Get the Colorado perspective on this matchup that's coming on Saturday. Thank you for listening. That's going to do it for this episode of Frogs Insider. I appreciate each and every one of you. Once again, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, leave us a comment on the video below. And if you're listening wherever you get your podcasts, make sure you're following the show. Leave us a rating and review. That helps us get in the ears of more Frog fans everywhere. We're growing at a crazy rate. Super thankful for all of you. Let's keep this show growing and rolling. Shout out to our sponsors, Hell's Half Acre Sporting Goods and Home Field Apparel. And we will see you Monday morning with a breakdown of TCU's game against Colorado. Until then, go Frogs.